Hello! This is a video about some of the ways you can create complex and musically interesting patterns using simple step sequences. If you've been following the channel for a while, you might have noticed that this is a favourite topic of mine, and that's because I think it's one of the areas where modular really shines. Today I'll be using the Sebsongs Polyseq. This is a 3-track, 12 HP module that's based around the classic SH101 style step sequencing technique, where you enter a series of notes and rests with ties and glides which then loop. It's a DIY kit available from Thonk, and they very kindly sent us one over along with the Sebsongs Sampler, which I did a video about recently. They also included the Euclidean module, which is a 3-channel gate pattern generator which I'll be using in a couple of the patches a bit later. Now, although the Polyseq makes some of the techniques I'm about to show you very quick and easy, you can do everything here using other sequences too, so hopefully you'll get some ideas to try with whatever gear you're using. I'll just give you a quick overview of Polyseq and then I'll get straight into some patching, so let's crack on. The Polyseq panel is pretty simple. At the top there's a tempo control for the internal clock, and when it's fully counterclockwise it's clocked externally via this clock input. When you're using the internal clock you can hold mode and use the knob to adjust the amount of swing. There's no dedicated clock output, but you could just use the gate out from one of the channels if you wanted to use this as your master clock. On the right is a button to enter record mode and a play stop button. Down the bottom there are CV and gate inputs where you'll need to connect an external device to program the sequencer. Bear in mind there's actually no way of entering note data directly on the Polyseq itself. I'll be using an Arturia keystep 37 in this video, which works really well. Then there's a CV and gate output pair for each of the 3 channels. Above these are 4 buttons which do different things depending on whether you're in record mode or play mode. In record mode you can use them to enter rests, ties and glides, or skip through the steps of a previously entered sequence. In play mode, the left one becomes a mode button and the others are used to set various options for channels 1 to 3 in conjunction with the knob in the middle. There are 8 memory slots for sequences in the Polyseq, and each sequence can be up to 64 steps long. To record a sequence you basically just connect your controller to the CV and gate input, pick a slot, so let's pick slot 1, press the record button, key in your notes, you can add rests, add a glide maybe, press record again when you're done, press play to listen back. Just loop like that. If you want to adjust the duration or change some of the steps, you can press record again, use the step button to step through, and that's 8 steps, so let's just stop it there, play back again, and now we've got a nice an 8-beat kind of loop, or an 8-step loop. And yeah, basically for each channel you select the sequence that's going to be played back by holding the channel button and turning the knob to select one of the 8 sequences. And you can also set the clock division, or the sort of playback speed for each sequence, by holding mode and then the channel button and turning the knob. So let's go for a divide by 2, and now when I play back it will be half the speed. You can also press mode and the channel button repeatedly to cycle through the playback modes. You can play forward, backward, ping pong and random. I'll demonstrate that a bit later. The other thing, without mode, just pressing the channel button mutes it or unmutes it. And that's basically it, I think. It's very simple to use, very intuitive and very quick to pick up, but it's very powerful once you start combining these channels, as you'll see in the patches. So let's crack on and start patching some stuff up. Okay, for this first patch I'm going to explore the idea of using a slower sequence to transpose a faster one. And I'm actually going to use the same sequence, and I'm going to use 3 copies of it. And I'm going to use, for the slower versions, I'm just going to use the built-in clock divider in Polyseq to kind of slow it down. Then I'm going to add them together using the precision adder in the IntelliGel case. And I'm going to turn a really simple kind of 4-note, very basic sequence into something that's much more complicated. So let's start by recording the 4-note sequence in on sequence 1. Just those 4 notes, which sound like this. Speed that up slightly. I'm just using the internal clock for this demo, just incredibly simple, just playing a voice in plats. And let's just add a little bit of swing if I hold mode and adjust the tempo. Cool. Now, if channels 2 and 3 are both playing back the same sequence, but if I set the division of channel 2 to divide by 4, I'll just play that on its own. If I just jump across to channel 2, that sounds like this. So it's the same sequence, just slower. So let's add together channels 1 and 2's pitches in the precision adder here, but trigger it just from the faster clock on channel 1, and we'll get this. So already it's a bit more interesting. And then let's take channel 3 and divide that by 8, which is the slowest it'll go. Let's add that into the mix too. So this is just the same 4 notes, but with this combination, it's really a lot more complicated. And if you want to get it even more complicated, try adjusting the clock division to an odd number or a prime number. Let's go for divide by 7 on channel 3. And let's go for divide by 5 on channel 2. And we've now got something that's incredibly complex compared to what we started with. I'll just break it back down again. Let's take out channel 3. Let's take out channel 2. And we're back to that. So one great way to make a simple sequence sound a lot more complex is to separate the gates which are triggering your voice from the pitch CV that's driving the pitch of the voice. So rather than triggering on every single note, if you trigger using a different pattern, and if that pattern is a different length to the pitch CV pattern as well, you get things that sound much more complex quite quickly. Let me show you what I mean. Here is a simple 7-step melody. And that's just looping away. Obviously, because it's 7 steps long, it would probably sound quite interesting against a 4/4 kick, but it is basically quite repetitive rhythmically, and it's just looping there. So the first thing we can do, I'm using the Euclidean module from Sebsongs here as well. I'm going to create a 7/16 Euclidean trigger pattern, and if I use that to trigger plats instead, let me just pull this out and go into the trigger input here. And if I start triggering, so this will trigger 7 out of 16. So you can kind of hear it's accenting. I've got quite a long decay envelope. Let me just try shortening that on plat slightly. Now we're still hearing the kind of changing pitches underneath, even though that envelope's pretty short. So the other thing we can do is use that rhythmic pattern to quantize or sample and hold basically the melody note, so that when one of those triggers hits, it will hold that note rather than changing pitch. So I've got a quantizer set up here, or any sample and hold would do as well. Let's just take the pitch out into the quantizer and take the quantized version into the volt per octave. And now the notes are only changing when the rhythm pattern hits. So that simple 7-step sequence is now sounding a lot longer as a pattern. It takes a long time to repeat because of this 7 steps against a 16-step pattern effectively with the rhythm. So let's bring a little bit of delay, a bit of reverb. So the underlying pattern here is just this 7 repeating notes in the sequencer, but by using this polymetric rhythm against it, we get a much more satisfying pattern. So another thing I like playing around with in a simple sequencer is the playback mode, or the playback direction. In the Polyseq you can play a recorded sequence forwards, backwards, in ping pong mode or random mode. Let me show you what I mean. Let's record in a simple kind of rising arpeggio, which sounds like this. And if you hold mode and stab the button, you can switch to reverse mode, ping pong, which goes up and down, or random. Now you can't CV control that switching, but what you can do is assign the same sequence to two different channels, change the playback mode of the second one, and then use a voltage controlled switch like this Dope one to switch between those two variations. So let's assign the same sequence to channel 2, so it's sequence 3, and let's have a quick listen to that, and let's switch that to reverse, say. So now I've got these two versions. I'm using the gate from channel 1 to control the whole thing, and I don't need to switch the gate pattern as well because it's just on every note. So let's take channel 1 into the first side of the switch and channel 2 out into the second input of the switch, and take the common output of the switch to the volt per octave. And then I'm going to use a slower gate from PAMS Pro to control the switching. So basically I've got it on a divide by 8, 25% width with the phase adjusted so that it'll, well, you'll hear. Let's just have a little play. So it's playing 3 times forward, 1 time back. We can switch to random playback instead. Of course, you can play around with whatever switching intervals you like. It's just a nice quick way of livening up a fairly static sequence. Now, one way to get a lot more mileage out of a simple monophonic sequence is to divide the notes of that sequence between two contrasting voices. And there's a few different approaches you can take to do that dividing. One might be to use a comparator to do it by note pitch, where the higher pitches trigger one voice and the lower pitches trigger the other. Another option might be to do it more randomly using a Bernoulli gate like mutable branches or the transient U1P that I've got over here. That way you could divide the gates randomly between one voice or the other. But the approach I'm going to take in this patch is using the Euclidean module from Sebsongs again. And I'm going to take advantage of the fact that channel 1 has got 2 different gate outputs. One that outputs a gate for every active step in the pattern, and one that puts out a gate when it's not active. So between the two of them, they've covered all 16 steps in the pattern, and I've got a 16-step sequence programmed in Polyseq. I've got 2 voices. One is a kind of square wave analog patch, just a really simple voice patched off screen, and the contrasting one is going to be plats in one of its rings-esque modes. And with the density of channel 1 pattern up on full, so all 16 steps will be triggered by the first gate, the sequence sounds like this. So this is a 16-step sequence. Every gate is firing it. By the way, in this patch again, I'm going to be using a quantizer to sample and hold the pitch voltages for each voice, so that we don't get them changing while the notes are being held. And now if I bring the density down, some of those notes start being replaced by the Plat's voice. And you'll hear the square wave bass voice becomes more syncopated as notes start being removed from it. So this is just the same sequence being split between those voices, but it kind of gives you 2 for the price of 1. Depending on how you've set your Euclidean density, it can be a bit more regular. And you can choose like what kind of weighting you want. So I've got 6 bass notes here versus 10 notes from the Plat's voice. So just that single monophonic sequence is giving us a lot more options here. And if I take the density all the way down to 0, we're hearing just the Plat's voice. So I want to finish off by using Polyseq to create a little groove with all 3 tracks playing 3 different voices, and I'm going to use different pattern lengths for a bit of polymetric action. So although the sequences themselves will be very simple, the way they overlap will be different each time they loop, so it'll sound a bit more interesting than just a straight up looping sequence. Let's start with a chord voice from Plat's, and I'm just going to record in a bunch of notes and rests to kind of create a 4-bar chord pattern. This is actually going to be the bit that's pretty much straight 4/4, which the other 2 parts will work around. So let's go for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 3 rests. Another 3 rests. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rests. 3 rests and F. And let's just have a quick listen to that. So that's fine, but I want to play that slower so that it spreads across 4 bars. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to assign this to channel 3. And let's just make sure I've selected sequence 1. And if I hold Shift and channel and divide by 2, now with this kick drum, I've got a 4-bar chord pattern. I'm just running it through Sarajevo for a little bit of delay. And now let's patch in the next voice to channel 1. I've got another little voice patched off screen. It's just a kind of saw wave into a filter. Let's go the volt per octave into there. And let's select sequence 2. Make sure I'm playing back sequence 2. And let's record in a little bass part for here. Now that's a 7-step sequence, so against those chords it should sound. So that's looping quite nicely. It's just like that 7 steps against the 4/4 kind of pattern gives us a nice looping rhythm. So again, let's move that over to channel 2. Let's assign channel 2 to sequence 2, and then I'll patch in my 3rd voice into channel 1. That's my gate and CV, and this is the harmonic shift oscillator off screen, just running through a low pass gate. And if I select sequence 3 here, and let's record in a kind of higher pitch melody pattern for here, and I'm going to go for 9 steps for this one. So let's try rest and another rest, and let's play that against the others. Let's bring in some other drums. And we can just use these buttons to mute the 3 parts. So I'm going to leave it there for today. Hopefully this video has given you a little flavour of what the Polyseq can do, and also given you some tips on how to spice up simple sequences in modular for more interesting results. If you've enjoyed the video, please leave a like and a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'll be back soon with more, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.